Like many out there, I do not have a lot of space to store terrain. I'm Gabriel, and this is Miniature Medium. Let's try and remedy that. All of my extra space is being taken by boxes of potential sleepless nights. I've been searching for ways to remedy that issue. The terrain storage, not sleepless nights. In my search, I've thought about totes, bags, and plain boxes. They all work, but don't solve the underlying problem. Terrain can take up a lot of space in storage. Bulkier sets or builds can be tricky to store without damaging one another, and the modular systems do tend to store more compact. I settled on boxes being the solution and proceeded to then over-engineer the solution. It wasn't until I was at a craft store looking for my new favorite tool that I found these little nesting boxes. The ideas began flowing, and one thing led to another until it hit me like a sack of bricks. These boxes are the terrain and the storage solution. There are 12 boxes here, starting at 15 centimeters cubed. That's about 6 inches cubed. I'm only using the 8 largest boxes to start off with, and I'm going to use the rest of them for later. But these 8 are going to form the main buildings of the terrain. And for some added versatility, the lids could also be standalone platforms. They're about 1.5 inches to 2 inches off the ground. That's ample space to provide difficult ground for scaling as well as cover. The buildings could also be flipped upside down, so that way they still have playable top surfaces even when the lids are not on. To retain the way that these store together, anything that I add to the boxes is going to have to be real tight to the original surface. And that means a lot of my details are going to have to be made out of flat stock, like plastic canvas, drywall mesh, or chipboard. To start off with, I designed a door template that allowed me to trace and cut out my doors. This allows me to make it a lot easier to make repeated shapes, as I want all of my doors to match style-wise. Now, that doesn't mean that they're all just going to be identical though. Each of them are going to be slightly different. What I mean by this is that the template I made has the door frame as a separate piece, along with the 2 inside door panels as separate pieces. So I can make any combination of closed doors, open doors, partially open or partially closed. With just doors, that doesn't give the surface enough visual interest. I mean, this is a very simple modular terrain, but that doesn't mean that there can't be something there that's a little bit different. So in some areas, mostly the same side of the box the door is on, because while I do still have to put the lid on these, I've got some larger panels that cover the entire side or a good chunk of it. These will help to provide a differentiation between different sections, as well as add a little bit more depth. These different panels can be anything from a structural bulkhead on the side to vents, barred windows, or even random panels that may allude to repairs being made over time. The lids are getting a similar treatment, however, on top of them, I'm putting down a layer of drywall mesh to create that gridwork pattern underneath, and then cut out different framed panels to go on top of that. Each has a unique size or design on that frame to accommodate the lid and make the pattern a little bit different. Before I can go on to priming and painting, I do have one more thing to try, and I'm going to add a bit of texture to some of the boxes and the lids. On the 2 smaller boxes, I'm going to use grout or sawdust to create that texture, and I'm going to use grout for the lids. Once that glue is dry, I can go ahead and run these all outside and begin priming. For the lids, I primed the tops black and the sides gray, and all of the buildings got a coat of that same gray primer. Back at the hobby desk, and we can go ahead and get started on some of our base coats. On most of these, I start out with a red base coat, and I swiftly follow that up with a greenish brown, and I'm just smearing that over the top, not really trying to cover it, but just add some variety in color. The lids get a different treatment though. I'm using the same desaturated red, but I'm thinning it out so it's more transparent. I don't want the coverage smooth, that way some of the gray primer or the black primer can actually show through. The main reason for not doing a solid coat is because the lids are actually also getting a rust treatment and a wash in just a little bit. These rust tones are just heavily watered down yellow and orange colors at differing saturations. In areas that the rust didn't touch, I'm going back in with a silver dry brush to be able to pick up the edges of the panels as well as the gridded detail within the framework. The three smallest buildings have a much heavier brown and green coat, and instead of applying rust or a wash to these, I'm going to use a watered down green so that way I can make a kind of green corrosion or some kind of green patina. At this point, all of those panels I was talking about earlier to add more depth and yada yada yada, they're not popping out like I intended. So let's go back in with some of this wash. I'm going to use a dark brown, dark black mixed wash to emphasize the panel separation between the different layers. So how does this solve my problem really? You may be asking yourself, okay, you made a bunch of boxes and some buildings. Okay, what about walkways or scatter, barriers, and all that other stuff that makes up a typical gaming table? Well, this video is just about the buildings. I will be going into tackling all of those other aspects of a table setup in future videos. This is just the first step towards making a modular system that also stores in a small space. After putting on all of those panel details, you're not likely to fit the boxes back together in the way that they came in the shrink wrap. The best way that I found is to split them up into two boxes, alternating the sizes so that way there is a larger gap between boxes. This way, you have an entire table's worth of buildings that fit within two 6-inch cubes. Now, I believe that is a very easy storage solution that you can just throw on a shelf. If you liked this video, you can go up here and there's another video that you may like. Otherwise, click the circle icon here to subscribe and we'll see you in the next one. Have fun, be creative, and happy hobbying.